A German shepherd kneels to plead for human help to save his puppies. At first, it looks like a desperate cry from a loyal dog. But what he's begging for is darker and far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. When an ordinary woman follows his plea, she stumbles into a hidden world of secrets, power, and betrayal. Behind locked doors, something is happening that no one is supposed to see. And the deeper she goes, the more she realizes this isn't just about saving puppies, it's about survival. Why was this dog never supposed to be alive? What hidden truth is powerful enough to silence anyone who gets too close? And when the moment comes, will courage be enough to stand against those who will do anything to keep the truth buried? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The storm clouds hung low over Ridgefield, their dark bellies promising more rain to come. Wren Hollis wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a small smudge of grease as she finished installing the last clip on her customer's new windshield. The wind whipped her work jacket around her legs, and she hurried to pack up her tools in the mobile van. Just another Tuesday, she muttered to herself, checking off the completed job on her tablet. The rain started again, fat drops splattering against the metal roof of her van. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the ground. As she closed up the back doors, movement caught her eye. Through the curtain of rain, a large shape emerged from the roadside ditch. Wren squinted, her heart skipping a beat, as she made out the form of a German shepherd, its coat caked with mud, and something darker that made her stomach clench. The dog limped toward her, each step careful and deliberate. Despite its obvious distress, there was something dignified about its bearing. When it reached the edge of the parking lot, it did something that made Wren's breath catch. The shepherd lowered itself to its knees, front legs bent in what could only be described as a purposeful gesture. "Hey there," she called softly, keeping her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. The dog's eyes locked with hers, intelligent and pleading. It wasn't the desperate look of a stray hoping for scraps. This was communication. The shepherd whined, a high-pitched sound that cut through the drumming rain. It turned its head toward the highway cut, then back to Wren, repeating the motion with clear intent. Another whine, more urgent this time. "You want me to follow you?" Wren asked, already reaching for her keys. The dog stood, limping a few steps toward the highway before looking back to make sure she was coming. Following a strange dog in the middle of a storm wasn't exactly in her job description, but something about those eyes and that deliberate kneeling gesture told her this was important. She climbed into her van and started the engine, driving slowly behind the shepherd as it led her down the rain-slicked road. After about half a mile, the dog turned onto a private drive marked by an imposing iron gate. Wren's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she recognized the property, Harlan Creed's estate. Everyone in Ridgefield knew about Creed, the wealthy horse breeder whose influence seemed to touch everything in their small town. The gate was closed, but the dog squeezed through a gap at the side where the ground had eroded. It looked back at her expectantly. Wren parked her van and got out, the rain immediately soaking through her jacket. She hesitated at the gate, then followed the shepherd's path through the gap. The dog led her past the main house to a large barn set back from the property. As they approached, Wren heard it, faint whimpers coming from inside. The shepherd pawed at the padlocked door, leaving muddy streaks on the worn wood. "There's something in there," Wren whispered, pulling out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed animal control. While the phone rang, she examined the lock, noting fresh scratch marks around its base. "Animal control, how can I help you?" "Hi, I'm at the Creed estate on Highway 23. There's a distressed German shepherd here, and I can hear what sounds like more dogs locked in a barn. Something feels wrong." "We'll send someone out to investigate. Please stay where you are and don't attempt to enter any buildings." Wren ended the call and crouched down to examine the shepherd more closely. Now that she had better light, she could see dark stains on its coat that looked worryingly like blood. There was something else. a leather collar partially hidden by matted fur. As she reached out to check for tags, a deep voice boomed across the yard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Harlan Creed strode toward them, his expensive boots splashing through puddles. A muscular man in work clothes followed close behind him. The shepherd's ears flattened against its head, but it stood its ground. "Mr. Creed," Wren straightened up, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found this dog on the highway. It led me here, and I can hear others inside the barn. I've called animal control." "This is private property." Creed cut her off, his face darkening. "You're trespassing. Jake, get that mutt back where it belongs." The hired hand moved forward, reaching for the shepherd. In the brief struggle that followed, Wren felt something come loose in her hand, a torn piece of the dog's leather tag. She instinctively slipped it into her pocket as Jake grabbed the shepherd's scruff. "I've got pictures of what look like sedation marks on his leg," Wren said, holding up her phone. The rain streaked across its screen, but the images were clear enough, puncture marks visible through the dog's fur. "Get off my property now," Creed snarled, taking a menacing step forward. "Before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing, and delete those pictures if you know what's good for you." Wren backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. The shepherd's eyes found hers one last time before Jake dragged it toward the barn. She hurried back to her van, hands shaking as she started the engine. Only when she was safely back on the highway did she pull over to examine what she'd taken from the dog's collar. The leather tag was worn, but the marking was still visible. I-5 burned into the surface like a brand. She touched the tag with trembling fingers, remembering the shepherd's deliberate kneeling, its pleading eyes. This wasn't just a stray or an escaped pet. This was something else entirely, something wrong. The rain continued to pound against her windshield as Wren sat there, the tag burning a hole in her palm. She knew she should probably just drive away, forget what she'd seen, delete the photos. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But the image of that shepherd kneeling before her, asking for help in the only way it could, was burned into her mind. The tag in her hand wasn't just a piece of leather, it was proof that something wasn't right at the Creed estate, and now that she had it, she couldn't just let this go. Thunder rolled overhead as Wren pulled back onto the highway, her mind already racing with what to do next. She might be just a windshield tech, someone most people in town barely noticed, but that dog had chosen her, had trusted her. The Y5 tag sat heavy in her pocket, a small weight that somehow felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Whatever was happening behind those barn doors, whatever had driven that shepherd to seek her help, Wren knew with absolute certainty that she was now involved, and she wasn't going to walk away. The windshield wipers squeaked against the glass as Wren pulled into the gravel parking lot of Ridgefield Veterinary Clinic. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, matching her somber mood. She clutched her phone and the leather tag close as she hurried toward the familiar single-story building where Dr. Calder Ames had helped her with injured strays before. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered. The waiting room was empty except for Martha, the elderly receptionist who'd worked there forever, doing a crossword puzzle behind the desk. "Oh, Wren, honey." Martha looked up with a warm smile. "No injured birds today?" "Not today, Martha." "Is Dr. Ames available? It's important." Martha must have heard something in Wren's voice because she didn't hesitate. "He's just finishing up some paperwork. Go on back to his office. You know the way." Wren walked down the familiar hallway, past exam rooms that smelled of antiseptic and kibble. She found Calder at his desk, his salt and pepper hair slightly disheveled as he studied some charts. He looked up as she knocked on the doorframe. "Wren," he said, his face creasing into a slight smile. "What brings you by on such a dreary day?" "I need your help, Doctor Ames, and your expertise." She pulled out her phone and the tag, laying them on his desk. "Something's wrong out at the Creed estate." His expression turned serious as she explained what had happened. The German shepherd's deliberate kneeling, the whimpers from the barn, Creed's threatening behavior. As she spoke, Calder picked up the leather tag, turning it over in his hands. "Show me the photos," he said quietly. Wren pulled up the images on her phone. Calder studied them intently, his frown deepening as he zoomed in on the puncture marks visible through the dog's fur. "These are recent sedation marks," he said finally, "and they're precise, done by someone who knows what they're doing. This isn't backyard breeding, Wren. This is organized." "The way he knelt?" Wren began. "That's a trained compliance behavior," Calder confirmed, leaning back in his chair. "Police and military canines are taught that. It's not something a regular pet would do." Hope flared in Wren's chest. "So you believe me?" "That something's wrong out there?" "I do." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "But Wren, you need to understand what you're up against. Harlan Creed has money. Serious money. And friends in high places. Getting angry won't help. If you want to stop whatever's happening, you'll need real proof. The kind that holds up in court. What kind of proof? Documentation, witness statements, paper trails. And you'll need to be careful. Very careful." He studied her face. "Are you sure you want to pursue this?" Wren thought of the shepherd's eyes, the way they'd locked onto hers with such desperate intelligence. "I have to." Calder nodded slowly. "Then you need Birdie Sloane." "The retired county clerk? She knows where every piece of paper in this county is filed, and she's been watching Creed for years. If there's a trail to follow, she'll find it." Wren pulled out her phone again, scrolling through her contacts. She'd helped Birdie with some computer issues a few months back, and the older woman had insisted on giving Wren her number, just in case. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp voice answered. "Birdie Sloane speaking." "Miss Sloane? This is Wren Hollis. I need your help." There was a pause. "Does this have anything to do with what I heard about a disturbance out at the Creed place earlier today?" "News travels fast," Wren said ruefully. "In small towns, it always does. Come over to my house, now if you can. Bring whatever evidence you have." Wren looked at Calder, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Birdie's house was a neat craftsman bungalow on the edge of town, its garden meticulously maintained despite the owner's advanced age. Wren parked behind a sensible older model Volvo and made her way up the front walk, Calder following close behind. Birdie opened the door before they could knock. She was small but sharp-eyed, her grey hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. A battered leather satchel hung from one shoulder, stuffed with what looked like files. "Well," she said, looking them both over, "you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, young lady. Come in before someone sees you standing on my porch." The inside of the house was as neat as the outside, with walls lined with filing cabinets instead of family photos. Birdie led them to a dining room table already covered with papers and folders. "Sit," she commanded, pulling out her own chair. "Now, tell me exactly what happened, and don't leave anything out." Wren recounted the story again, laying out the tag and showing the photos. When she finished, Birdie was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. "I need names," she said finally. "Not just Creed's. Who else might be involved? Think carefully, especially about any law enforcement connections." Wren hesitated. "Well, Sheriff Norcross is always out at the estate. They're close friends. Hunting buddies, I think." "Dale Norcross," Birdie muttered, pulling a notebook from her satchel. "That tracks. He's been signing off on things he shouldn't for years." "What kind of things?" Calder asked. "Disposal records. Euthanasia certificates. Things that never quite added up." She looked at Wren. "That tag, Y5, it's a designation, not a name. Military or police, most likely. And if that dog is alive when records say it shouldn't be, then there's proof of fraud," Calder finished. "But we'd need access to those records." "Oh, I know where they are," Birdie said grimly. "I filed most of them myself before I retired. The question is, how do we get to them legally?" The 3 of them bent their heads together, sketching out possibilities. Birdie's knowledge of county bureaucracy was encyclopedic. While Calder's veterinary expertise helped them understand what documentation would be most damning, Wren listened and learned, her determination growing stronger with each passing minute. "We need to be smart about this," Birdie cautioned as the afternoon wore on. "Document everything. Build the case carefully. One wrong move and they'll bury it all under lawyers and threats." "And be careful," Calder added, his eyes meeting Wren's with concern. "People like Creed, they're used to power, to getting their way. They won't take kindly to anyone threatening that." Wren nodded, thinking of the shepherd's pleading eyes, of the whimpers from that barn. This wasn't just about saving some puppies anymore. This was about exposing something rotten at the heart of their town, something that had been allowed to fester because the people behind it thought their money and influence made them untouchable. "I understand the risks," she said quietly. "But that dog chose me for a reason. He trusted me to help. I won't let him down." Birdie's sharp eyes softened slightly. "No, I don't suppose you will. That's why I'm going to help you." She began gathering her papers. "We'll need to move carefully but quickly, before they realize what we're doing." "Where do we start?" Wren asked. "With the paper trail," Birdie said firmly. "Always start with the paper trail. Those records won't vanish themselves, and every false signature, every forged document, is another nail in their coffin." As they finalized their initial plans, Wren felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by purpose. That shepherd had knelt before her, asking for help in the only way he could. Now she had experts in her corner, people who believed her and were willing to help. Whatever was happening behind those barn doors at the Creed estate, whatever network of corruption and cruelty had been operating in the shadows, it wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. They would gather their evidence, build their case, and when they finally moved, it would be with the full force of the law behind them. The rain had stopped by the time they finished, though dark clouds still hung low over the town. As Wren walked to her van, Calder called after her. "Be careful," he said again, "and call if you need anything. Day or night." She nodded, touched by the concern in his voice. As she drove home, the leather tag secure in her pocket, Wren felt the weight of what they were undertaking. But she also felt stronger, more certain. Sometimes the right thing to do was also the hard thing, and she was ready for whatever came next. Birdie Sloane's living room had become a makeshift investigation headquarters. Papers were spread across her coffee table, spilling onto her floral-patterned couch, and even onto the carpet. The warm glow of her reading lamp illuminated stacks of photocopied documents, while her ancient desktop computer hummed in the corner, displaying scanned records from her years as a county clerk. "I knew something wasn't right about this," Birdie muttered, adjusting her reading glasses as she compared two documents side by side. Her grey hair was falling loose from its usual neat bun, but she didn't seem to notice. "Look at these dates, Wren. Look at these signatures." Wren leaned forward from her perch on the arm of the couch, while Dr. Calder Ames stood behind them both, his normally calm demeanor showing signs of tension. The document on the left was a standard euthanasia form, dated 2 years ago. The signature at the bottom belonged to Sheriff Dale Norcross. "Here's where it starts to fall apart," Birdie continued, her finger tracing along the lines. "K9 Ranger, designation Y5, was supposedly put down after an aggression incident. But look at the intake dates compared to the processing dates. Look at these timestamps." Calder adjusted his glasses, frowning. "The documentation sequence is off. There should be a waiting period between the incident report and the euthanasia authorization. This shows them happening almost simultaneously." "Exactly." Birdie's voice rose with excitement. "And that's not all. I pulled every form with Norcross's signature from that month. Look at how he signs his name here." She pointed to the euthanasia document, compared to his regular signatures. She laid out 3 more documents in a row. "See how the N is different? The stroke is hesitant, like someone trying to copy his signature." Wren's heart began to race. "Are you saying these documents are forged?" I'm saying someone went to an awful lot of trouble to make it look like Y5 was properly euthanized when he wasn't. Birdie's eyes sparkled with the thrill of discovery. There's more. The veterinarian who supposedly performed the procedure retired 2 months before this date. Someone wasn't careful enough with their dates when they created this paper trail. Calder began pacing, his footsteps silent on Birdie's worn carpet. This explains the sedation marks I saw in your photos, Wren. Those weren't random injections. They were systematic, the kind you'd see in a breeding program. And who has the money and influence to pull something like this off? Wren's voice was barely above a whisper. Harlan Creed. The pieces were falling into place like a terrible puzzle. Birdie pulled out more documents, property records, business filings, old newspaper clippings about Creed's horse breeding success. Creed's got his fingers in everything around here. Racing horses, real estate deals, even some construction contracts with the county. But look at these bank transfers. She pointed to highlighted numbers. Regular payments from his accounts to offshore entities, all just under the reporting threshold. A breeding pipeline, Calder said, his voice tight with controlled anger. German shepherds with police training backgrounds are valuable, their puppies even more so, if you're selling to the right or wrong people. Wren felt sick to her stomach. Fighting dogs, or breeding more dogs for fighting. Both, probably, Birdie said grimly. These high-level trained dogs, they're worth a fortune to the right buyers. And Y5's bloodline? Pure gold to someone like Creed. The truth hit Wren like a physical blow. Y5 had never been euthanized. The whole thing had been an elaborate scheme. The falsified aggression incident, the forged paperwork, all of it designed to make a valuable police dog disappear into Creed's breeding operation. But Norcross had to be involved. Wren said, standing up to stretch her tight muscles. These are his signatures, forged or not. He would have known. Oh, he knew, Birdie confirmed, pulling out more papers. Look at these building permits for Creed's property. All signed off by the sheriff's department, no inspections required, and these noise complaints that mysteriously disappeared. Norcross has been running interference for years. Calder stopped pacing and braced his hands on the back of Birdie's armchair. So we're looking at a conspiracy between a wealthy breeder and a corrupt sheriff, with who knows how many others involved. They've got money, influence, and official authority on their side, and they've got everything wrapped up in official-looking paperwork. Birdie added, makes it hard to prove anything's wrong unless you know exactly where to look. She patted her stacks of documents proudly. Good thing they never thought an old records clerk would go digging. Wren stared at the documents spread before them, each piece of paper representing another link in the chain of corruption. Her fear about what they were uncovering was real. These were powerful men they were up against, but that fear was hardening into something else, a deep, unshakable certainty that they had to act. Those puppies in that barn, she said slowly, they're not pets to them. They're not even living creatures, they're just merchandise, and Y5. She thought of the intelligent eyes of the German shepherd, the way he had knelt in front of her in the rain, asking for help. He's just a breeding machine to them. The whole operation is designed to look legitimate on paper, Birdie said, shuffling through more documents. But once you know what you're looking at, the holes are obvious. Dating discrepancies, forged signatures, missing inspection reports, it's all here. Calder ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. We need to be careful how we proceed. These men won't hesitate to use their power against us if they feel threatened. We've got one advantage, Birdie said, her voice firm. They don't know we know. They don't know we've connected these dots. And they certainly don't know I've kept copies of every suspicious document I've ever processed. The three of them looked at each other in Birdie's lamplit living room, surrounded by the paper trail of corruption. They were an unlikely team, a mobile windshield repair technician, a veterinarian, and a retired records clerk. But they had something their opponents didn't. The truth, carefully preserved in Birdie's meticulous records. So what do we do now? Wren asked, looking from Birdie to Calder. "Now," Birdie said, reaching for another stack of papers. "We build our case. We document everything. We find every inconsistency, every forged signature, every suspicious transaction. We make it so airtight they can't wriggle out of it." "And then?" Calder prompted. "Then we take it to someone who can't be bought," Birdie said firmly. "Someone outside Norcross's jurisdiction, because one thing's certain, this goes deeper than just one dog and some puppies. This is about money, power, and men who think they're above the law." Wren looked at the euthanasia document that had started their investigation, the paper that claimed Y5 was dead. In her mind, she saw him again, proud and desperate, kneeling in the rain. He'd chosen her to ask for help. She wouldn't let him down. "They thought nobody would look closely enough to see through their paperwork," she said quietly. "They thought nobody would care enough about one dog to ask questions." They were wrong. The evening wore on as they continued to sort through documents, building their case piece by piece. Outside Birdie's windows, the street was quiet and dark, but inside, 3 determined people worked to bring the autumn night wrapped around them like a thick blanket as Wren's van crawled along the dirt road leading to Creed's property. Her heart thumped against her ribs while she watched Dr. Calder Ames's truck following close behind in her rearview mirror. Birdie sat beside her, clutching a worn leather briefcase stuffed with carefully organized papers. "You're sure about this timeline?" Wren asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Birdie nodded, her grey hair catching the dashboard lights. "County regulations are clear as day. A wellness check can be conducted anytime there's reasonable suspicion of animal welfare concerns. We've got more than enough documentation to justify this visit." In the passenger seat, Birdie pulled out her reading glasses and double-checked the paperwork one more time. The state humane officer, Linda Martinez, was already waiting at the designated meeting spot, a small turnout just before Creed's main gate. As they pulled up, Officer Martinez stepped out of her official vehicle, her uniform neat and badge gleaming under the security lights. She was younger than Wren had expected, maybe in her mid-30s, with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Evening, folks," Martinez said quietly as they gathered around her vehicle. "Mrs. Sloan, I've reviewed the documentation you sent over. The pattern of irregular euthanasia records combined with eyewitness accounts gives us grounds for inspection." Calder joined them, his medical bag in hand. "Thank you for taking this seriously, officer." "Just doing my job," Martinez replied. "Now, let's go over the protocol. We announce ourselves at the gate, present the inspection notice, and proceed in an orderly fashion. No one touches anything without documentation first. Photos are permitted as part of the official record. Dr. Ames, you're here as our veterinary expert to assess animal welfare. Clear." They all nodded. Wren's hands were trembling slightly as she tucked her phone into her jacket pocket, making sure it was ready to take pictures. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on her shoulders. Martinez led their small convoy up to the main gate. The security camera swiveled to track their approach. She pressed the intercom button, her voice steady and professional. "This is Officer Linda Martinez with the State Humane Society. I'm here to conduct a welfare inspection under Section 47.3 of the County Code." There was a long pause before the gate creaked open. The grounds were dark, except for security lights casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. As they drove toward the barn, Wren noticed cameras tracking their every move. A sleepy-looking ranch hand met them at the barn door, clearly caught off guard by their arrival. Martinez handed him the inspection notice. "Please inform Mr. Creed that we're conducting a routine welfare check. We'll need access to all areas where animals are housed." The ranch hand looked uncertain, but nodded, unlocking the heavy barn door. The smell hit them first, antiseptic overlaying the musty scent of hay and animals. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing rows of metal cages along both walls. Wren's heart clenched when she saw Y5 in one of the larger kennels. The German shepherd's ears perked up at their entrance, his intelligent eyes finding hers immediately. Other dogs filled the surrounding cages, mostly shepherds and similar working breeds. "Start documenting," Martinez directed, her notebook already out. "Dr. Ames, please begin your assessment of the animal's condition." Wren pulled out her phone, hand steady now as she photographed the facility. The cages were clean but sparse, with no enrichment items visible. She captured images of medical supplies on a metal table, vials of sedatives, syringes, and breeding equipment. Calder moved methodically down the rows, examining each dog while making notes. When he reached Y5's cage, he paused longer, doing a thorough check while carefully slipping a tiny tracking device onto the dog's existing collar. The movement was so smooth, so natural, that even Wren almost missed it. Birdie had found a desk in the corner and was carefully photographing ledger books and veterinary records. Her experienced eyes scanned the documents, looking for discrepancies that would match her earlier findings. They had been working for perhaps 20 minutes when headlights swept across the barn windows. Multiple car doors slammed outside. "Officer Martinez!" A sharp voice called out. "This inspection is hereby suspended." A man in an expensive suit strode in, flanked by 2 other attorneys. He held up a document. "I'm Gerald Winston, representing Mr. Creed. We have an emergency injunction halting this search pending judicial review." Martinez took the paper, reading it carefully while the tension in the barn rose. "This appears to be in order," she said finally, her disappointment carefully masked. "We'll need to withdraw immediately. After you surrender any photos or documentation collected during this illegal search," Winston demanded. "The search was not illegal," Martinez countered firmly. "It was conducted under proper authority. The photos and notes are part of the official record and will be preserved pending review." Wren's heart was racing as she carefully tucked her phone away, grateful she'd been automatically backing up the photos to a secure cloud account as she took them. She could feel Winston's suspicious gaze following her movements. They filed out of the barn, the attorneys watching their every move. As Wren passed Y5's cage one last time, she saw his tail wag slightly. The tiny tracker was invisible against his collar, but she knew it was there. A small victory in what felt like a crushing defeat. Back in their vehicles, the mood was somber, but not entirely defeated. Martinez spoke quietly through Wren's window. "I'll fight this injunction. The documentation justified our inspection, and what we saw tonight, even briefly, supports further investigation." Birdie patted Wren's arm. "We got what we needed, dear. Sometimes winning isn't about big victories, it's about small steps forward." As they drove away, Wren glanced in her rearview mirror. Creed had arrived, standing in the pool of light outside the barn, his face dark with anger as he spoke to his attorneys. They'd been noticed, certainly. The element of surprise was gone. But they'd achieved something vital: documentation of the facility, and most importantly, a way to track Y5's movements. Calder pulled up beside her at the first stoplight, rolling down his window. "Tracker's active," he said quietly. "Signal's strong. Whatever happens next, we'll know where he is." Wren nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination. They had evidence now, proof that something wasn't right at Creed's facility. The pictures would show the clinical setup, the breeding equipment, the careful records that suggested this was far more than a simple kennel operation. And somewhere in that barn, a brave dog who had asked for her help now carried a tiny beacon of hope. The light turned green, and they drove into the darkness, leaving Creed's property behind but carrying with them the tools they needed to continue their fight. The night's work had been interrupted, but not before they'd planted seeds that could grow into something much bigger than a simple inspection. The morning after their late-night inspection, Wren sat in her van outside a client's house, preparing for another windshield repair. Her phone buzzed with a text from Calder. "Sheriff incoming." Her stomach dropped as a patrol car pulled up beside her, its lights off but presence unmistakable. Sheriff Dale Norcross emerged, toothpick dancing between his teeth as he approached. His badge caught the morning sun, a flash of authority that made Wren's hands clench. "Miss Hollis," he drawled, pulling out an official-looking paper. "Got something for you." Wren stepped out of her van, standing tall despite her racing heart. The sheriff thrust the document into her hands, a harassment citation. "This is a formal warning," Norcross said, his voice carrying the weight of threat beneath its casual tone. "Stay away from Creed's property. Next time won't be just a piece of paper. Could be looking at jail time." "I was there legally," Wren protested, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "With a state humane officer." "Save it for someone who cares." Norcross cut her off. "Way I see it, you're harassing a respected member of this community. One more incident, you'll be viewing this town through bars." He turned and walked away, boots crunching on gravel, leaving Wren clutching the citation. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and called Calder. "He served me with harassment papers," she said quietly. "Threatened jail if I go back." "Stay where you are," Calder replied. "I'm coming to look at those documents." But before Calder could arrive, Wren's phone rang again. This time it was her boss, Tony, from the windshield repair company. "Wren, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "Got some complaints about you. Anonymous calls saying you're causing trouble, harassing people. Can't have that kind of attention on the business." "Tony, wait." Wren started, but he continued. "Sorry, Wren. You're good at your job, but I can't risk it. We're letting you go. Come by later for your final check." The line went dead. Wren sat in her van, staring at the phone, as her world seemed to crumble around her. First the threat of jail, now her livelihood stripped away. Her rent was due in 2 weeks, and her savings wouldn't stretch far. Calder arrived 20 minutes later, finding Wren still in her van, face pale but determined. He read through the citation, his expression growing darker with each line. "This is intimidation, plain and simple," he said, looking up at her. "But we need to be smarter than them. No mistakes, nothing they can use against us." "They're already using everything against me," Wren replied, her voice tight. "I just lost my job. Anonymous complaints to my boss." Calder's face softened. "Come to my clinic. Birdie's already there, working on the documentation." At the veterinary clinic, they found Birdie surrounded by papers, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she meticulously reviewed every document from their investigation. "They're playing dirty," Birdie said, looking up as they entered. "But that just means we need to be cleaner than clean. Every piece of paper, every photo, every signature, I'm double-checking everything. Chain of custody has to be perfect." Wren sank into a chair, the weight of her situation settling heavily on her shoulders. "I can't even pay my rent now. They're trying to run me out of town." "Stay with me," Calder offered immediately. "I've got a spare room above the clinic." "No." Wren shook her head. "I appreciate it, but that would just give them more ammunition. I need to stand on my own." Birdie looked up from her papers, eyes sharp with concern. "At least let us help with food. My garden's producing more than I can eat anyway." Wren felt tears threatening but blinked them back. "Thank you, both of you. But we need to focus on what matters. What's the tracker showing?" Calder pulled up the tracking app on his tablet. Red dots showed Y5's movements around Creed's property, regular patterns between the barn and various outbuildings. "They're not stopping," he said grimly. "If anything, they're increasing activity. See these clusters? They're moving something, probably puppies, between locations. Getting ready to move them out, I'd guess." "The ring's not pausing," Birdie agreed, shuffling through more papers. "They're tightening operations, making sure their tracks are covered." Wren stood up, pacing the small office. Her world had been upended, her reputation smeared, her financial security destroyed. But watching those red dots move across the screen, she felt something crystallize inside her. They thought they could break her with threats and poverty. Instead, they'd only strengthened her resolve. "We need a new plan," she said, turning to face her allies. "Something smarter, more targeted. They're expecting me to either give up or make a mistake. We won't give them either." Calder nodded slowly. We focus on the documentation first. Build an airtight case. And we watch those tracker patterns, Birdie added. Learn their routines, find their weak spots. Wren looked between them, the veterinarian who'd become her strongest supporter and the retired clerk whose expertise was their foundation. She might have lost her job and her reputation, but she'd gained something more valuable, allies who believed in justice as much as she did. I can find other work, she said firmly. Maybe not here in town, but in the next county over. Something to keep me going while we build this case. What matters is stopping them from hurting more dogs like Y5. The next few days tested her resolve severely. Word spread through the small town. Whispers about the troublemaker, the woman who harassed respected citizens, the windshield tech who couldn't be trusted. Doors that might have offered employment closed before she could even knock. But each morning, Wren checked the tracker data with Calder, watching the red dots that proved their investigation wasn't in vain. Each afternoon, she sat with Birdie, learning to document everything with perfect precision. And each evening, she returned to her small apartment, counting out her dwindling savings and reminding herself why this mattered. She took odd jobs, house cleaning for elderly residents who didn't care about gossip, handyman work in the next town over, anything to piece together enough for rent. Her meals became simpler, her expenses stripped to bare necessities. But she refused to break. The tracker continued showing increased activity around Creed's property. Multiple vehicles coming and going at odd hours, Y5's movements suggesting regular breeding activity. They were clearly preparing for something bigger. Look at this pattern, Calder pointed out one morning, showing Wren and Birdie the latest tracking data. They're consolidating operations, moving things between buildings more frequently. They're not just continuing, they're accelerating. Which means we need to accelerate too, Birdie said, spreading out her latest findings. I've cross-referenced every euthanasia record with veterinary logs, found 3 more cases like Y5's, dogs supposedly put down that probably went into their breeding program. Wren studied the documents, her determination growing stronger. They thought they could scare me away, make me too busy surviving to fight back. She looked up at her friends, her voice firm. But they just proved how important this is. If they're willing to go this far to stop us, imagine what else they're hiding. The isolation that should have broken her spirit instead forged it stronger. Each act of retaliation showed her exactly why she couldn't give up. Every closed door reminded her of Y5's pleading eyes, of the whimpers from that barn, of all the dogs who needed someone to stand up for them. We keep it clean, Calder reminded her, his hand warm on her shoulder. Build the case right, and they can't touch it. And while they're watching for you too. Birdie's small kitchen table had disappeared under stacks of papers, invoices, and freight records. Her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she meticulously compared documents, making careful notes in her precise handwriting. The morning sun streamed through the window, highlighting dust motes dancing above her work. Look at this, she said, waving Wren and Calder over. Feed store invoices from Creed's company. Massive orders, way more than his visible livestock could need. But that's not the interesting part. She pulled out a separate stack of freight records, laying them side by side with the invoices. See these dates? Every major feed order lines up exactly with rail yard activity. They're using feed shipments as cover for animal transport. Wren leaned closer, her heart beating faster. How did you get these records? Birdie's eyes twinkled. 30 years as a county clerk teaches you a thing or two about paperwork trails. Everything's public record if you know where to look. And look here. She pointed to a recent entry. There's another shipment scheduled, 48 hours from now, at the rail yard. Calder studied the documents carefully. This could be our chance. They won't expect us to know about the transfer, if we time it right. We could catch them in the act. Wren finished. Get solid proof of what they're doing. The 3 of them gathered around Birdie's kitchen table, the morning light growing stronger as they outlined their plan. Calder brought out his tablet, showing Y5's latest tracking data. The movement patterns suggest they're consolidating the puppies, he explained, probably getting ready for this transfer. We need to move fast, but we have to do this right. Birdie nodded firmly. No vigilante justice. Everything by the book, so they can't wiggle out later on technicalities. They spent hours refining their strategy, considering every angle. Wren and Calder would need to reach the barn first. They knew the layout, and Calder's veterinary expertise would be crucial for handling the puppies safely. Birdie would coordinate from her home office, monitoring the tracker and staying in contact with the state humane officer she'd cultivated a relationship with. Timing is everything, Birdie emphasized, spreading out a timeline she'd created. We need enough evidence gathered before the humane officer arrives, but we can't trigger any alarms. One wrong move, and Creed's lawyers will shut us down again. Wren felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They'd come so far, weathered so much opposition. This could be their one chance to expose everything: the breeding operation, the falsified records, the corruption that had allowed it all to continue. "Run through it again," she requested, wanting to be absolutely certain of every detail. Calder pulled out a rough sketch of the property. "We'll approach from the south side, where the security cameras have blind spots. The tracker shows Y5 is usually in the main barn during early morning hours. That's our best window. I'll be monitoring his movements," Birdie added. "If anything changes, I can alert you immediately, and I'll have the humane officer ready to move in as soon as you signal." They reviewed their roles repeatedly, checking and double-checking every detail. Wren would focus on documenting everything with her phone's camera, while Calder gathered the puppies and any medical records. Birdie would coordinate the timing, ensuring the official response arrived at exactly the right moment. "Remember," Calder said quietly, "we're not just rescuing puppies. We're building a case that has to stand up in court. Everything needs to be documented properly." Wren nodded, understanding the delicate balance they needed to strike. Speed was crucial, but so was precision. They couldn't afford any mistakes that could compromise their evidence. As the planning session wound down, Wren found herself standing at Birdie's kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere across town, behind Creed's imposing gates, Y5 and his puppies were waiting. The wealth and influence that had protected their abusers for so long seemed almost tangible, a wall of money and power that had seemed impenetrable. But they had something stronger: the truth, meticulously documented in Birdie's careful handwriting, backed by Calder's professional expertise, proven by the tracking data that blinked steadily on his tablet. They had built their case piece by piece, weathering every attempt to stop them. "We're ready," she said finally, turning back to her friends. 2 days from now, we end this." The next 48 hours passed with agonizing slowness. They fine-tuned their plan, checked their equipment, reviewed their roles. Birdie continued monitoring the tracker, confirming that the patterns held steady. Calder prepared his medical kit, ready to treat any puppies that might need immediate care. Wren spent the time double-checking her phone's camera settings, making sure she had enough storage space for extensive documentation. She charged backup battery packs, not willing to risk running out of power at a crucial moment. The morning before the planned operation, they met one final time in Birdie's kitchen. The familiar space had become their war room, the scattered papers and documents their ammunition against corruption. "Everything's in place," Birdie reported. "The humane officer understands the situation. She'll be ready to move as soon as I give the signal." Calder reviewed his medical supplies one last time. "I've got everything we might need for the puppies. The most important thing is getting them out safely and legally." Wren looked at her friends, the retired clerk whose expertise had uncovered the truth, the veterinarian whose integrity had never wavered. Together they had built something powerful, a case for justice that couldn't be ignored or brushed aside. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly, "we show them that money and influence can't hide the truth forever." They spent one final hour reviewing every detail, every contingency. The plan was solid, built on Birdie's meticulous research and supported by weeks of documentation. They weren't rushing in blindly. They were executing a carefully crafted strategy designed to expose years of corruption. As Wren drove home that evening, she felt a calm certainty settle over her. They were walking into a place where wealth, law, and secrecy converged. But they weren't going in alone. They had truth on their side, backed by evidence that couldn't be denied. Tomorrow, everything would change. For Y5, for his puppies, and for everyone who had ever been silenced by power and money. The truth was about to break free, and no amount of influence could stop it. The sunset painted the sky in shades of deep purple and orange as Wren and Calder approached Creed's property under the cover of dusk. Their hearts pounded with determination and fear as they crept toward the barn where they knew Y5 and his puppies were being held. The evening air was thick with tension, carrying the weight of everything at stake. "Ready?" Calder whispered, his normally steady hands slightly trembling as he gripped his veterinary kit. Wren nodded, clutching the tire iron she'd brought as a last resort. They'd planned this moment carefully, but something felt wrong. The air carried an unusual chemical smell that made her nose twitch. As they reached the barn door, Wren was surprised to find it yielding easily to her touch. Too easily. The heavy wooden door swung open with barely a creak, and immediately they were hit with a punch of something that made their eyes water, the unmistakable reek of accelerant. "Gas!" Calder hissed, grabbing Wren's arm. "Someone's doused the place." Before they could retreat, a flash of orange erupted from the far corner. Flames leaped up the wooden walls with frightening speed, racing along the rafters like living things. The roar of the fire was deafening, drowning out everything except the terrified yelps of the puppies inside. "The carriers!" Wren shouted, pointing to where they'd stashed the pet carriers earlier that day. "We have to get them out." Smoke began filling the barn, thick and black, making it hard to see and even harder to breathe. Through the chaos, they could hear the frightened whimpers of puppies. Wren's heart clenched. They couldn't leave them to burn. The heat was becoming unbearable as Calder rushed to gather the nearest carriers, his veterinary experience keeping him focused despite the danger. Wren realized they needed another way out. The main door was now blocked by falling debris and flames. Without hesitation, she swung the tire iron at the nearest window. The glass shattered, creating a precious escape route. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the flames, but also giving them a chance to survive. Through the thickening smoke, a familiar shape emerged. Y5, moving with purpose despite the chaos. The German Shepherd was doing what he'd been trained to do, herding the last remaining puppy toward Wren and safety. His intelligence shone in his eyes as he nudged the frightened pup forward. A thunderous crack split the air. Wren looked up to see a massive wooden beam, consumed by flames, breaking free from the ceiling. "Look out!" Calder yelled, but it was too late. The beam crashed down mere feet from where Wren stood. The impact sent her to her knees, choking on the dense smoke. Her lungs burned as she struggled to breathe, but her hands found the last carrier. With strength born of desperation, she muscled it toward the broken window. Calder's strong hands appeared through the smoke, grabbing her shoulders and hauling her clear of the inferno. They collapsed together on the grass, gasping for clean air as the barn burned behind them. In the distance, sirens wailed. Help was coming, but Wren's relief was short-lived. The first vehicle to screech into the property wasn't a fire truck. It was Sheriff Norcross's cruiser. The sheriff emerged, his face twisted with what looked like satisfaction rather than concern. Behind him, more vehicles arrived, including Creed's men in their dark trucks. "Well, well," Norcross drawled, striding toward where Wren and Calder sat catching their breath. "Looks like we caught ourselves an arsonist." "What?" Wren croaked, her voice raw from smoke. "No, we were trying to save it for the judge." Norcross cut her off, producing handcuffs. "Harlan Creed's property goes up in flames the same night you're caught trespassing? That's not coincidence, that's arson." While Norcross roughly cuffed Wren's hands behind her back, she watched in helpless fury as Creed's men moved with practiced efficiency. They were loading crates that hadn't been in the barn, into a waiting box truck. Even through her smoke-blurred vision, she could see the truth. They'd moved most of the operation before setting the fire. The puppies she and Calder had managed to save were only a small fraction of Creed's operation. "You can't do this," Calder protested, trying to step between Wren and the sheriff. "We have evidence." "Evidence of breaking and entering, maybe." Norcross smirked, shoving Wren toward his cruiser. "And now arson. The judge will love that combination." Wren's face was streaked with soot and tears as she was forced into the back of the police car. Through the window, she watched the box truck's taillights disappear toward the railway line, taking with it the proof they'd fought so hard to expose. Y5 stood at the edge of the property, his posture rigid with distress as he watched her being taken away. The fire trucks were finally arriving, but it was too late. Too late for the evidence that had gone up in flames. Too late for the puppies they couldn't save. Too late for justice. As Norcross pulled away from the scene, Wren pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the orange glow of the fire fade into the distance. Her clothes reeked of smoke, her wrists hurt from the tight handcuffs, and her heart ached with the knowledge that Creed's operation would continue. But even as she was driven away in disgrace, a small part of her clung to hope. They had saved some of the puppies, and somewhere out there, Calder and Birdie would keep fighting. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. In the growing darkness, the cruiser's headlights cut through the night as Norcross drove Wren toward the county jail. She might be headed for a cell, but her mind was already working, thinking about the proof they still had, the tracker data, Birdie's documents, the rescued puppies themselves. They had wanted to do this the legal way, but Creed and Norcross had changed the rules. Now they would have to fight even harder for the truth to come out. The soot-streaked woman in the back of the police car might look defeated, but inside, Wren's determination burned hotter than any fire. They thought they had won by framing her, but they didn't understand. Sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The cruiser turned onto the main road, and Wren closed her eyes, gathering her strength. The night might belong to Creed and his corrupt allies, but tomorrow was another day. And she wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. In the dim light of dawn, Birdie Sloane's weathered hands trembled slightly as she arranged the documents on her kitchen table. Decades of working with county records had taught her the power of paper trails, and now she held the smoking gun that could bring down both Sheriff Norcross and Harlan Creed. The forged euthanasia documents for Y5, with their mismatched dates and suspicious signatures, told a story of corruption that couldn't be ignored. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she'd carefully researched. State Investigator Marcus Chen, whose jurisdiction covered cases of law enforcement misconduct. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. "Inspector Chen? This is Birdie Sloane. I have evidence of document forgery and abuse of power involving Sheriff Dale Norcross." She paused, listening. "Yes, sir. I can email everything right now. You'll want to pay special attention to the euthanasia records from 2 years ago." Across town, Calder Ames stood at the county jail's bond desk, his checkbook open and his jaw set with determination. The amount was steep, $5,000, but he didn't hesitate. He'd scraped together his emergency fund and some savings meant for new clinic equipment. None of that mattered now. "I'm posting bond for Wren Hollis," he said firmly to the clerk. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his tired face. He hadn't slept since the fire, since watching Wren being led away in handcuffs while Creed's men disappeared into the night with their precious cargo. The processing took nearly 2 hours. When Wren finally emerged, she looked smaller somehow, her usual spark dimmed by 24 hours in custody. Her work boots scuffed against the linoleum floor as she walked toward him. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured as they headed to his truck. "Yes, I did." His voice was gentle but firm. "We're in this together, remember?" The drive to Wren's small rental house was silent. She stared out the window at the familiar streets that now felt alien and hostile. Her phone had been buzzing constantly with texts from her former boss, spreading the word about her criminal behavior to other potential employers. Her reputation, built carefully over years of honest work, lay in tatters. Inside her house, the weight of everything crashed down. Wren sank onto her worn couch, head in her hands. I-5's bed still sat in the corner where she'd hoped to bring him home someday. Now that dream seemed foolishly naive. "I lost everything," she whispered. "My job, my name in this town." And for what? They're still out there, still hurting those dogs. Calder sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "We're not done yet." Birdie's working on. A cold nose suddenly pressed against Wren's hand. I-5, who had been curled up in his bed, padded over and nudged her phone where it lay on the coffee table. The screen lit up with the tracker app they'd installed. "Wait." Wren sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. "Look at this." A red dot pulsed on the screen, moving steadily along the outskirts of town. Calder leaned in closer, his breath catching. "That's near the rail yard." "The crates! They're moving them now!" Wren's voice rose with renewed purpose. She was already on her feet, energy surging back through her tired body. They called Birdie, who arrived within minutes, her silver hair escaping its usual neat bun. The three huddled around the phone, watching the tracker's steady movement. "There's only one freight train scheduled through today," Birdie said, consulting her ever-present notebook. "It stops for 30 minutes to switch tracks before heading north." "That's our window," Wren said firmly. Her earlier despair had transformed into focused determination. "If we can delay that train until law enforcement arrives..." "I'll call Inspector Chen back." Birdie nodded, already dialing. "He needs to see this operation in action, catch them red-handed." Her voice was clipped and professional as she spoke to the investigator. "Yes, sir. We can provide real-time tracking of their location, but we need a short head start, just enough time to ensure they don't slip away again." Calder studied the rail yard layout on his phone. "There's a maintenance access road that runs parallel to the tracks. We could use that to get ahead of them." Wren checked her watch, mind racing through possibilities. The reckless anger that had driven her to confront Creed directly had been replaced by something cooler and more focused. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about doing things the right way. "If we can get there first, find a way to delay the train legally." She trailed off, then smiled slightly. "You know, I still have my hazmat certification from that safety course last year. If we were to spot a suspicious leak near the tracks..." "That would trigger mandatory safety protocols," Calder finished, catching her meaning. "They'd have to halt everything until it was cleared." Birdie hung up her phone, eyes bright with purpose. "Inspector Chen is mobilizing a task force. They'll be ready to move in 15 minutes, but they'll hold back until we give the signal." She reached out and squeezed Wren's hand. "This is it, honey. We do this smart, we do this right, and we end it today." The tracker continued its steady movement toward the rail yard, each ping bringing them closer to their final confrontation with Creed's operation. Wren felt strength flowing back into her spirit, not the desperate, angry strength of before, but something cleaner and more powerful. They had truth on their side, and finally the law would be there to back it up. They gathered their gear quickly, documentation, phones, cameras. This time they weren't rushing in alone. This time they had a plan, they had backup, and most importantly, they had hope. The dark cloud that had settled over Wren began to lift as she checked the tracker one last time. Those innocent puppies, Y5's puppies, were counting on them. And this time, they wouldn't let them down. Calder laid out a local map on Wren's kitchen table, his finger tracing the route to the rail yard. "If we take Oak Street, we can cut through the industrial park and beat them there by at least 10 minutes. The train's scheduled maintenance stop is at the north switch," Birdie added, consulting her notes. "That's where they'll try to load the crates." Wren nodded, her mind clear and focused. The despair that had threatened to drown her just hours ago had been transformed into steely resolve. We'll need to split up to cover both access points. Birdie, you coordinate with Inspector Chen from the south entrance. Calder and I will take the maintenance road. The plan was taking shape, built on careful strategy rather than desperate impulse. This time, they weren't just reacting. They were one step ahead. The tracker app beeped again, showing Y5's signal moving steadily closer to the rail yard. Time was short, but for once, it was on their side. Remember, Birdie said as they headed for their vehicles, no heroics. We just need to delay them long enough for the task force to arrive. Let the law do its job this time. Wren caught her reflection in her truck's window. Tired eyes, but steady determination. She wasn't the same person who had first found Y5 in that storm. She was stronger now, wiser, and absolutely certain of her path forward. The morning sun was climbing higher as they pulled out of her driveway, casting long shadows across the quiet street. Somewhere ahead, Creed's operation was making its final move. But this time, justice was waiting at the end of those tracks. The evening shadows stretched long across Wren's driveway as they prepared for their final stand. Time was precious now. Every second counted as they loaded the essential equipment into her weathered work van. Calder moved with practiced efficiency, carefully arranging the tools they might need: heavy-duty bolt cutters that could slice through chain-link fencing, portable kennels of various sizes lined with soft blankets, and first aid supplies for both humans and animals. Wren sat cross-legged on the floor of her van, surrounded by printed maps of the rail yard. Her finger traced the maze of tracks, committing every detail to memory. The main line, the switching tracks, the maintenance access roads, she needed to know it all. Years of working as a mobile technician had taught her the value of knowing exactly where she was going before she got there. "Here," she said, pointing to a spot on the map where several tracks converged. "This is where they'll have to slow down to make the switch. That's our best chance." Birdie paced nearby, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in low, urgent tones with Inspector Chen. Her usual feisty energy was focused to a laser point, her voice clear and professional as she relayed critical information. "Yes, Inspector. We have confirmed movement toward the north end of the yard," Birdie said, checking her tablet where Y5's tracker signal pulsed steadily. "2 transport vehicles, at least 6 crates that we know of. They'll be attempting to load within the hour." The inspector's response crackled through the phone, and Birdie's face lit up with grim satisfaction. "Thank you, sir. Yes, we understand. We just need enough time to prevent them from moving those crates before your teams arrive." Calder finished securing the last kennel and joined Wren at the maps. His steady presence helped calm the nervous energy thrumming through her veins. "Remember," he said softly, "we're not trying to be heroes. We just need to slow them down." Wren nodded, though her heart was racing with anticipation. "I know. Do it smart, do it legal." She managed a small smile. "I've learned my lesson about charging in without thinking." The sun was sinking fast as they pulled out onto the road, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. Wren's van led the way, with Birdie following in her sensible sedan. The rail yard was on the outskirts of town, where the industrial zone faded into scrubland. As they drove, Wren could see the silhouettes of freight cars lined up like sleeping giants against the darkening sky. They parked in the shadow of an old warehouse, killing the engines but leaving the keys ready. 5 sat alertly in the back of Wren's van, his ears pricked forward and his nose working constantly. He seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying perfectly quiet as they made their final preparations. "There," Calder whispered, pointing toward a line of freight cars. In the growing darkness, they could make out the shapes of men moving between the cars. The beam of a flashlight swept across crates being unloaded from a truck, crates marked with the familiar logo of Creed's feed company. Birdie pulled out her phone one last time. "Inspector Chen's units are in position, just waiting for our signal." She squeezed Wren's hand. "Be careful, honey. Don't take any unnecessary risks." Wren squeezed back, then turned to Calder. "You take the south fence line. That's where they'll try to bring in the trucks." I'll handle the train. Calder nodded, hefting the bolt cutters. Y5 with me. He commanded softly, and the shepherd padded silently to his side. They separated, moving through the growing darkness like shadows. Wren's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the line of freight cars. The familiar smell of diesel and hot metal filled her nostrils, bringing back memories of countless repair jobs around industrial sites. She'd always been good with mechanical things. Now that knowledge might save lives. The ladder on the side of the flat car was cold under her hands as she began to climb. Her boots found each rung surely, muscle memory taking over despite her nerves. She could hear voices now, men calling to each other as they prepared to load the crates. Above her, barely visible in the dying light, was her target, the manual brake wheel that could bring the whole operation grinding to a halt. Reaching the top of the ladder, Wren carefully pulled herself onto the small platform. The brake wheel was a solid piece of metal, worn smooth by years of use. She wrapped her hands around it, planting her feet firmly, and began to turn it with all her strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a screech of metal on metal, the brakes began to engage. The train, which had been slowly building momentum, shuddered as friction took hold. She could hear shouts of confusion from below as the cars began to slow. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" A heavy voice boomed from below, followed by the sound of boots on metal. Wren gritted her teeth and kept turning the wheel, forcing the brakes tighter and tighter. The whole train was groaning now, fighting against the unexpected resistance. Suddenly, a large shape crashed into her from behind. It was one of Creed's foremen, his face red with anger as he tried to force her away from the brake wheel. Wren held on desperately, knowing that every second she could keep the train from moving was another second closer to justice. The man grabbed her arm, trying to break her grip on the wheel. Pain shot through her shoulder, but Wren refused to let go. She'd come too far, fought too hard to give up now. The train lurched beneath them as the brakes fought against the engine's power. "Get off there!" the foreman shouted, but Wren ignored him. In the distance, she heard something that made her heart leap, the faint but growing wail of sirens. Help was coming. All she had to do was hold on. The struggle on the flat car platform became more desperate as the foreman realized what was happening. He yanked at her jacket, trying to throw her off balance, but Wren had spent years working on unstable surfaces. She kept her feet planted, her hands locked around the brake wheel, her whole body focused on one task, keeping that train from moving until the law arrived. Below, she could hear more shouts and the sound of running feet. Somewhere in the chaos, Y5's deep bark rang out, followed by Calder's commanding voice. The sirens were getting closer now, their urgent cry splitting the night air. Pain shot through Wren's arms as she maintained her grip on the wheel. The foreman had wrapped his arms around her waist, trying to bodily lift her away from the controls. She kicked backward, connecting with his shin, and he cursed but didn't let go. The train shuddered again, caught between the power of its engines and the resistance of the locked brakes. Metal screamed against metal as the cars fought their own momentum. Wren's arms trembled with effort, but she wouldn't release her hold. Too much depended on this moment, the puppies in those crates, Y5's freedom, justice for all the animals that had suffered under Creed's cruel enterprise. Suddenly, the night exploded with light. Police spotlights swept across the rail yard, turning darkness into harsh day. The foreman froze, his grip on Wren loosening as he realized what was happening. Below, voices shouted, "Police! Don't move!" And the sound of running feet turned to chaos. Still, Wren held the brake wheel, her knuckles white with effort. She wouldn't let go until she was sure, absolutely sure, that this was over. The foreman had backed away from her now, his hands raised as officers swarmed the area. "Wren!" Calder's voice cut through the chaos. "You can let go now. They've got them." Only then did she slowly release her grip on the wheel, her fingers aching as they uncurled. Her whole body trembled with exhaustion and fading adrenaline as she carefully turned to face the scene below. Police cars had surrounded the area, their lights painting everything in alternating red and blue. Officers were putting handcuffs on several of Creed's men, while others were examining the crates that had been about to be loaded. Inspector Chen himself was striding across the yard, his badge catching the light as he directed his teams. Calder appeared at the bottom of the ladder, Y5 at his heel. "Come on down," he called softly. "Let the professionals take it from here." As Wren started to climb down from the train car, the foreman made one last, desperate move. He lunged forward, tackling her from behind. They both crashed onto the metal platform with bruising force. Wren felt the air rush from her lungs as her shoulder slammed against the grating. Before she could even catch her breath, a blur of fur and muscle launched through the air. I-5 had seen the attack on Wren and reacted with protective fury. The German Shepherd's powerful body collided with the foreman, knocking him away from Wren. I-5's teeth were bared, his hackles raised as he positioned himself between Wren and her attacker. "Drop the dog!" Sheriff Norcross's voice cut through the chaos. He had appeared at the edge of the commotion, his service weapon drawn and aimed directly at Y5. "I'll put him down if I have to." But Calder was already moving. With deliberate steps, he placed himself between the sheriff's gun and Y5. His tall frame blocked the shot completely as he stared Norcross down. "You're not shooting anyone tonight," Calder said, his voice steady and firm. "It's over." The yard suddenly flooded with light as multiple police vehicles poured in, their sirens wailing. State trooper cars boxed in every exit, while uniformed officers moved in with precision. Behind them came unmarked vehicles. The state investigators' task force had arrived in force. Wren struggled to her feet, her body aching but her spirit soaring as she watched justice finally arrive. Y5 pressed against her leg, still alert but no longer aggressive now that the immediate threat had passed. Calder kept his position, refusing to move until Norcross lowered his weapon. The state investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Martinez, strode into the center of the scene. "Sheriff Norcross, lower your weapon and put your hands where I can see them." Norcross's face twisted with rage, but he was surrounded. Slowly he lowered his gun and raised his hands. 2 state troopers immediately moved in to take him into custody. Birdie emerged from one of the unmarked cars, clutching her leather satchel of documents. Her grey hair was flying loose from its usual neat bun, but her eyes were bright with triumph as she approached the investigator. "Here's everything," she said, pulling out file after file. The forged euthanasia records, the fake transport permits, the money trails through shell companies, and those ledgers they recovered from the barn before the fire. They match perfectly with the financial records I found. Martinez nodded as she examined the evidence. More officers were opening the crates on the train, revealing whimpering puppies packed into tight spaces. Each discovery added another charge to the growing list: racketeering, fraud, animal cruelty at the felony level. A commotion at the yard entrance drew everyone's attention. Harlan Creed had arrived, probably alerted by one of his men. He stormed toward the scene, his expensive boots crunching on gravel, but stopped short when he saw the wall of law enforcement. "This is ridiculous," he blustered. "I run a legitimate business. You have no right—" "We have every right." Martinez cut him off. She held up one of Birdie's files. "Your signature is on every one of these forged documents, Mr. Creed. Officers, take him into custody." Under the harsh glare of police floodlights, both Creed and Norcross were handcuffed and led to separate patrol cars. The foreman and several other employees were also taken into custody as the investigation expanded. Later that night, as the scene was being processed, Investigator Martinez approached Wren, who sat on the back of an ambulance being checked for injuries from her fall. "Miss Hollis," Martinez said, "I want to personally thank you for your courage in bringing this operation down. Your persistence in the face of intimidation and threats helped us uncover a criminal enterprise that's been operating for years." She held up a piece of paper. "And I've made sure that harassment citation from Sheriff Norcross has been permanently scrubbed from your record." Wren felt tears prick at her eyes as weeks of stress and fear finally began to lift. I-5 pressed his head against her knee, and she scratched behind his ears, marveling at how this brave dog had changed her life. 2 weeks later, Wren sat in Dr. Calder's veterinary office, filling out adoption papers. Y-5 lay at her feet, while 2 puppies rescued from the train played nearby. Birdie sat beside her, serving as an official witness to the adoption. Never thought I'd be signing happy paperwork for once, Birdie said with a smile, watching Wren complete the forms. Calder leaned against his desk, watching them with warm eyes. You're giving them a good home, Wren. All three of them. As Wren reached the final signature line, Y5 did something that made her heart catch. He rose and performed his perfect kneel beside her chair, not in desperate pleading as he had that first rainy night, but in calm certainty. He gently nuzzled her hand as she signed, as if adding his own approval to the document. There, Wren said softly, scratching Y5's, now officially renamed Ranger's, ears. We're a family now. The puppies tumbled over to join them, and Calder knelt down to help corral their excitement. Birdie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she added her signature as witness. Outside the window, afternoon sunlight painted everything in warm gold, a gentle blessing on this new beginning. Wren looked around at her unlikely family, a retired clerk who had believed in her, a veterinarian who had stood beside her, a brave dog who had trusted her, and two playful puppies who represented hope for the future. Her life had been completely transformed by one act of courage, by choosing to stop and help when she saw suffering. In that quiet moment, surrounded by love and justice served, Wren knew she had found her true path. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.